intro.
Sure.
All right. Following you around.
Okay.
Good. Switching to you. You are live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session for the DC JBugs User Group. Today, we are pleased to announce that we have Jamie Jones from GitHub, who is going to walk through all the collaboration and capabilities of GitHub and GitHub Enterprise. I think everyone's familiar, if you're a developer, that you've used github.com. And for me personally, I didn't know that there were so many much more collaboration tools and capabilities of GitHub. So I've seen this presentation before, and I'm really eager for you guys to see it because lots more capabilities than I was aware of. So over to you, Jamie.
Thank you very much, Rick. As Rick mentioned, I'm Jamie Jones, Government Solutions Engineer here with GitHub in the DC area. Slides, I support both federal, state, and local customers, both here in the DC area and throughout the country. Engineer by nature, was a federal contractor for 11 years prior to coming to GitHub. Most of that time spent writing Java, so very friendly with Hibernate and the entire Red Hat Hibernate stack. JBoss deployment, of course. And I spend most of my time currently working with my government customers, helping them get onto GitHub within their own enterprise, helping them with best practices. A lot of my customers are migrating from Subversion, TFS, or other legacy systems, so teaching them the ins and outs of Git, as well as best practices on integrations and how to improve their workflow. So for most of you, probably already know, but a quick overview of what is GitHub. So you may know github.com, right? It's that website that lets you host or download other people's projects and code for free. We are at our core a distributed version control platform based on Git, and we provide that web interface to support source code management. But above that, we're actually a powerful collaboration platform for teams. What I mean by that is not only are we hosting source code, but we support issues and wikis and pull requests, at which point you can mention teams, users, other robots within the system, and let these features create a discussion, create a conversation around your code that's more than just the code. We always talk about self-documenting code, writing comments. Well, now your actual version control system can provide some of that documentation as well. And along with that integration and collaboration platform, we are an API. We are a webhook. We are truly an integration bed. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. A brief overview of GitHub. So again, most of you know github.com, the website, and that started in about 2008. That's when our founders, working on a side project, collaborating on Git, decided there must be a better way to share this code, share these Git patches amongst each other. At that point, they had been emailing them, putting them on an FTP server, doing whatever they can to get them from one another. So they said, hey, let's build a website where we can all share this code. That worked for about 3 months until everyone else in the neighborhood, everyone else in the startup community found out you have a website that allows you to share Git code, Git patches, Git check-ins. We want some of that. GitHub.com was born. That went on through about 2010, where Chris was at a conference and someone came up to him and said, I use GitHub for all my open source projects. I use private repos for all my personal projects, but I really want to use it in my business. Github Organizations were born. That brings in not only the same features of public and private repositories, but teams and individual users and collaboration. That worked until about 2012, where more people came and said, I really want to use it in my business, but you don't understand. My business has government regulations. It has policy. It has data security or PII. I just can't put it on github.com. There must be something for me. And that's where GitHub Enterprise was born. So GitHub, the company, is really, you can think of it as 3 different pieces. GitHub.com, the website that many of you have seen. GitHub Enterprise, it's 2 flavors, both on-premises, available as a virtual appliance for VMware, Hyper-V, OpenStack, or in a private cloud such as AWS or Azure. Not only are we available in AWS and Azure, but we are available in their government-specific FedRAMP locations as well. So AWS, that's GovCloud, and Azure, that's their FedRAMP data centers, both East and in the Midwest. So why enterprise? Why do I see our customers, especially in the government, but all throughout the world, quite frankly, going to enterprise versus .com or organizations? Well, one of the reasons is the audit capabilities. So you have compliance or regulatory requirements that require you to log certain events, keep it around for a certain amount of time. That's not a configurable option on GitHub.com. Also, because you're running the system yourself, you can use whatever regulatory or log storing technologies you already have in place, whether it be Splunk, Logstash. We have users who have regulatory requirements where they keep all commits and all actions for over 6 years. Another strong point of GitHub Enterprise is its support for local identity providers. Well, you can go to github.com today and sign up for a username and password. That may not meet your organization's security requirements. You may not even use username and passwords. You may use two-factor authentication with an RSA token or perhaps a smart card. With GitHub Enterprise, we will hook into your identity provider solution, whether it be LDAP, SAML, CAS, or something else, and abide by your own policies. What that also means is you get single sign-on. That's one less password you have to worry about. You log into your systems just once, like you do for many other applications, and you have access into GitHub Enterprise as well. Another reason is store your code where you want it. Again, the notion of putting that code in the cloud, this is your business product. This is your special sauce. Keeping it on your own servers within your own firewall where you have the peace of mind that it's backed up and protected is very important to a lot of our customers. Now, that's not to say that github.com doesn't do those same things, but at the end of the day, this is your livelihood, and often you want to have control of that fate versus trusting a third-party provider. And finally, it lives where your employees work. As enterprises across the country, across the world have grown, they've decided on what tools are right for them. This could be things like continuous integration or delivery, continuous operations. This may be static code analysis, security scanning, or any number of other products. Some of these live only within your firewall or even on a disconnected network itself. Exposing these tools to the outside internet just isn't a valid solution for your team, so that's where enterprise can come into play. Since it as well can sit behind your firewall, it has access to all of these local tools that your organization has grown to know and love. When you think of GitHub Enterprise, think of it like github.com, the website, but running on your own servers. One of the things that I think makes GitHub and GitHub Enterprise unique from its competitors or even other legacy tools is its strength of its integration. I like to say that GitHub Enterprise not only is a version control system, it really is a platform. This was codified on October 1st during our user conference this year. We announced the GitHub Integrations directory. And so you can see a screenshot on the screen, as well as the URL that you can hit it from home. But we currently list 38 published integrations within this. You can pull them up yourself, but you can see when you click on one of them, like on the screen right now, such as Slack, it'll give you not only information about what that integration is, maybe what that company is, maybe who else uses it, but also pricing, installation instructions, and how to configure it for your own organization. GitHub.com and GitHub Enterprise already ships with over 250 service hooks that you can, within minimal clicks, add different integrations to your repositories or organizations. This can include things like CloudBees or Jenkins, HP Fortify, Review Ninja, or Travis CI. But the integrations directory is our attempt to give you a more fully functional and descriptive way of finding the tools that your organization needs. Often when I'm talking to the government, they'll ask me, well, we know now that we have GitHub, we know we need continuous integration. We know we need code analysis. We know we need some sort of lint or code checking tool. Can you suggest us any? And this integration directory is our goal at accomplishing that. And so along with that, you can see the ecosystem, just a portion of the ecosystem that GitHub Enterprise supports. We've divided things up into 3 stages that we believe any software developer or anyone working with software is aware of: building the code, collaborating on the code once it's built, or actually deploying the code. So you can see here just a sample of the many different tools that we integrate. Of course, Visual Studio, IntelliJ, and Eclipse, things like Jira, Slack, ZenHub, and Trello, Pivotal Tracker, and deploying to places like AWS, Azure, using CI like Jenkins, CloudBees, and Travis, as well as Docker. Also, one of the things I would like to mention briefly is intersourcing. So I have a link on the screen to a pamphlet that O'Reilly and PayPal have put together and published just earlier on this month at OSCON Europe that talks about intersourcing. And the notion is you can take the advantages, the knowledges, the best practices of open sourcing and apply them to your specific organization. So with GitHub Enterprise, of course, we're trying to support code discovery, reuse, and open collaboration between teams, a key factor of the open source world. But you also see groups, our most highly efficient enterprise customers, arranging their organization not by projects, but by disciplines, by expertise. I think of a common open source project I'm used to, Spring, the Java framework. There's over 50 submodules currently of that. And if people only organize themselves by Spring DB or Spring Core or Spring Web, you'd only see a portion of the pie. But as more and more teams organize themselves by such as database or web or identity experts, you see how you can get pulled into multiple pieces of the chain. Identity, of course, is key in web to provide authentication and in things like Spring Security, but also in database, also in local session stores. So by breaking yourself up by skill sets instead of a specific team or project, you can get more view and input into your team. And again, by having a single intersourced repository or organization, you can then share these best practices across your entire organization instead of being stovepiped. So that's all I had for recorded slides. Hopefully you have a little bit better idea of what GitHub Enterprise is and what it does and how it can help your organization. So now I wanted to provide a brief example, some live demos, if you will, of some of the more platformy advanced usages of GitHub. This can work for github.com or GitHub Enterprise. A lot of people, again, are using GitHub to store code, to write issues, but hopefully this will give you this will open up your mind to some more of the things it can do. So right now I have a pull request up on the screen for my modern clock project, and this pull request is attempting to implement time zone support. So I will actually pull up what the modern clock looks like today. And show you that it is a very basic clock, though its advantages are it has 3 different clock faces that you can change. Our developers, of course, have noted we have employees across many time zones. It would be wonderful if this clock also supported time zones. So a pull request was created, changes were made, everything was good to go. However, unlike what you may be used to, this merge pull request button at the bottom is not green. So I'm taking advantage here of some new functionality within GitHub in its latest GitHub Enterprise in the 2.4 release and what was exposed on github.com in September, which is protected branches and required statuses. And so you can see on the screen that code review via an app called Review Ninja is currently not green. This is a way that we have seen users enforcing a code review process right from right within GitHub. And you can also see there's a comment denoting the current status of the code review. So just to move things along, I'm going to go ahead and show you the code review interface. It's very nice. It has direct authentication into GitHub. You can see it immediately knows about my repository, dev modern clock, as well as my pull request, and shows a view of the pull request itself. You can see my changed files in a way that I can leave line-based comments on any of the changes necessary. But what I'm going to actually demonstrate is how I, as an approver, can allow this pull request to be continued on. So in Review Ninja, they use the terminology ninja stars, which is how you can vote or show your concurrence with a pull request. I click the ninja star button for this pull request number 8. It incremented the number by 1. And since the requirement was only 1 ninja star, you can see within the app, the merge pull request button is now green. If I were to go back over to my pull request, because it's using the Github Enterprise API, it immediately alerts the pull request that this pull request has been approved. It has the appropriate number of ninja stars, and my merge button is now green. You can, if we go back to all the checks, you can see I was also running a Jenkins job that ran my unit tests, runs my integration tests, which many of you are probably familiar with. But now with required statuses, we can tie this right back into the pull request itself and enforce that those checks, those code reviews pass in order to make a change. I'll show that again. I have another pull request in another repository. This is in my ops repository in a project called Core System Ansible. So this is where the ops side of my DevOps team is currently managing all of our Ansible scripts. So this is how they can create, configure, and deploy servers on demand, quite frankly. For our existing JBoss server, you can see there was a pull request created to update the Java version. As the pull request states, we want to use 1.8.1 instead of 1.8.0. So some commits happened to make that happen. But you can see my pull request is failing right now. The checks are failing. My core system Ansible linter is failing. And if we look at the detail, and because of that, my merge pull request button, unclickable. If we look at the details of this, it takes us directly to our Jenkins job. And like any other Jenkins or CI job, you can check the output, and you can see it's erroring out, telling me exactly what's wrong. I'll save you some trouble and tell you that its issue is there's actually too many spaces in this, or not enough spaces in this file. You can see one of my changes when I updated the version from 1.8.0 to 1.8.1, I removed the tabs, I removed the spaces. So if we were to come in via the web UI, fix those spaces, commit our change, you can see our pull request is yellow because the checks are being rerun. And if I edit the correct number of spaces, we'll see the checks come back as successful. You can see my checks are green, everything is passed. My merge pull request button is now green. One of the things that's nice about GitHub is we're a blank slate. We provide issues, we provide pull requests, we provide the way to edit code online, but we don't enforce any workflow. However, with the integrations directory, required statuses, the platform that is now available, you can turn that blank slate into whatever process your organization needs. Also, when we think of code review, I think of a lot of mundane tasks. I think of checking our styles. I think of checking our techniques. Now, when you look at it, you can let the system do more and more of that for you. Imagine no longer checking in code that not only doesn't compile, but doesn't meet your team standards, doesn't meet your lint standards, doesn't meet your style guides. Let the platform, let the tools do more of this checking for you, and you, the developer, do more of the coding. So those are just two of the integrations I wanted to show tonight, two of the examples of using the platform and required statuses to improve your workflow. And that's all I had, so thank you for joining.
Fantastic.
Can
we ask some questions?
Yeah.
Actually, an observation, by the way, one of our other groups in our company is using this, or is using GitHub anyway, and the code reviews are really being facilitated by them being able to see each other's pull requests. So
yep.
Because of that, it just becomes a natural part of the process. That,
absolutely.
That people are critiquing in real time, in a sense,
yep.
and that's working extremely well.
Yeah, what's interesting is, so at GitHub itself, we use GitHub for all of our work, all of our code reviews, that sort of thing. And quite frankly, that's how we think most companies can work. The pull request itself, adding line comments, working in the conversation is enough code review to create good code. But not every organization works that way. Some of them are used to more rigid processes, or because of regulation, because of policy, there actually has to be a physical someone has to approve this code. And so I'm happy to report that GitHub can support those workflows as well, but does not require them.
Back to the user groups themselves. Can I belong to many?
Absolutely. So what we see with one of our existing government clients right now is they've aligned themselves, of course, based on projects, as you would expect. So you're a member of your project, and maybe you're a member of your project's web development team or DBA team. So you can sort of get notifications on multiple different groups, all honing down more or less to just you and your immediate group. But above that, people are members of the Oracle DBA group in general. They may be a member of emerging database technology in general, or they may be a member of just general self-interest groups, such as those who like to bike, those who like to swim, those who get into the office before 6 a.m. We see the more functional teams are self-identifying in many groups. So there may be 30 or 50 repositories, but we see these organizations having hundreds of teams as different ways to slice and dice. The other reason that's important, so imagine you're working with your project and you're on the database team and you have an issue. Well, of course it makes sense to mention your project's database team, but 9 times out of 10, you've all worked on the same project. You have the same experience. This is something that's going to befuddle all of you. So by now you can mention your organization's database team, the whole Oracle DBA or MySQL DBA or database community. You can bring even more of the relevant parties to the conversation and get more help.
Another question. You threw me off. This was the question. Do you see customers using the issues as their backlog in terms of managing things they need to do for their product?
Absolutely. Well, so I see it across the board. I see many teams using issues to manage their backlog, feature requests, bugs, enhancements, as well as conversations. I see some teams using larger tools such as Jira or Redmine that has a more defined workflow and process, or at least available. Then I see other teams using things like Pivotal Tracker or ZenHub. And that sort of gives them the agile Kanban board of having control, and it ties directly into the GitHub issues. So you still get the ability to @mention issues, whether it be in a pull request like we saw earlier, or actually in a commit, or to use the API to move those straight to those other products.
Now your examples are in Java right now, but obviously it supports any kind of source code. And then what are the links to integrations that may be PHP or Perl or specific? Absolutely.
So all of my examples today have been in Java. Again, I'm a former Java developer, so Java is near and dear to my heart. At GitHub, of course, most of our apps are built in Ruby. However, we do have a bunch of other languages at play for different pieces. GitHub can support any languages. One of the reasons for coming out with the integrations directory is not only we wanted to be able to surface tools, we wanted to be able to surface the best tools for what your environment is. If you're looking at Visual Studio, that makes us aware that you're more likely a Microsoft shop. Maybe you're working in C# or ASP.NET. So it allows us to give you it allows us to recommend some tools that may work better with those products as well. So right now the integrations directory is at version 1.0, which you can see again at github.com/integrations. But over the coming weeks and months, we'll see additional changes, including the ability to surface more languages.
Hey guys.
Each time I run across Git and GitHub, I'm continually impressed at things I would never have thought of. So, what kind of direction do you think you see it going in the future? Meaning, what is going to be the future that we haven't thought of yet?
Well, so one of the things that's a strongly held belief with GitHub is that we're for the developer. But what people don't realize is that means everyone who's touching software. It's funny, I was talking with a government agency a couple months ago who doesn't develop software, right? They develop reports, they develop graphics, they develop highly complex algorithms. But at the end of the day, they're now realizing we're actually software developers. They're writing Perl code, PHP code. bash scripts or even little R algorithms. They're writing code and they need tools, facilities to support that. People who had never heard of a version control are now realizing we kind of need something like this. So I see more and more of the world writing software, even if they don't realize that's what they're doing. There was a good article that came out this weekend about Capital One, the bank and credit card company. It started off by giving the Wikipedia definition of what Capital One is. We're a finance company. We make credit cards. We have banks and support home loans. But then the quote from their CTO is, actually, we're a software company. What makes us work and what makes us unique and what makes us actually operate is our software. Yeah, we move money instead of moving boxes. Yeah, we manage loans instead of managing contracts, but we're a software company. So again, that same line of more and more people will be developers, will be writing software, whether or not they realize it. The other thing that I see happening, while GitHub is for the developer and more people are becoming developers, more and more people are interacting with software too. I can share that at GitHub itself, we all use GitHub. Of course, that makes sense. We have a lot of software developers, but we also have a lot of people who write documentation. We have a lot of people in our legal department. We have a lot of people who do accounting or HR. They're using the same GitHub that the software developers are using. Because if you think about it, if you want to talk to a developer, you can @mention them. If you want to talk to HR, you can create an issue. We'll create our requirements in a markdown document in their repository. We'll create a pull request. At that point, legal and the sales associates working with the customer are now going back and forth in a pull request like any other conversation and are creating GitHub as we know it. So that's the other thing that I think we'll really see is that software is no longer just the one writing code, but it's everyone involved with software, including the project management.
I think it's been surprising how GitHub Pages and related things have brought back Markdown in the sense of a publishing system. I go back to the NROP days or TROP days, I think. Right? It's just kind of funny how that works well, and I think that people transitioning to it are interesting because you see spin-offs of that like Gitbook and other things that are doing exactly that. And as you said, they're not software people. They are they're producing content of some kind that can be controlled electronically, digitally. And GitHub is facilitating those cool ways of doing it without them having to know the details behind it.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned GitHub Pages. I'll most definitely give a plug. So one of the things that GitHub does really well at is increasing discoverability between our searching capabilities and also the ability just to look at all the repositories you can see and find that Twitter widget or find that jQuery edition that you or plugin you need. But I see a lot of really great things in the open source community or even big corporations around GitHub Pages. Things like Microsoft.github.io or Netflix.github.io, or in the government space, there's numerous, I think it's developer.gsa.com. I can follow on with some links after this meetup of people who are using their GitHub Pages to showcase their repositories. You know, and this is not so much for a developer to look at because you're used to looking at a repo. You're used to looking at a code. But in the sense of the Microsoft one, I'll pull that up right now. You know, look at what we see. We see a nice styled, pretty colored, easily searchable in the top right corner, name of their repos, the description, the notion of stars and forks. You can immediately see, holy cow, whatever this is has over 5,000 stars. This must be pretty cool. If I'm looking for the .NET Core runtime, this may be the one I want to go to. So while GitHub.com and repositories are great for developers, again, seeing GitHub Pages really take off and sort of the links it has via Jekyll to repositories makes it really easy to sort of make those projects discoverable to a wider audience.
And associated with that is surprisingly low cost. For example, if you're running EC2 instances with WordPress or Ghost or whatever, versus a static or a generated thing with Octopress and Jekyll with no cost, basically, and it's still producing the same content is an impressive thing. And showing that as an example of both abilities and capabilities and cost reduction at the same time. Doing quite a bit of that.
I'm looking right now for the fork. I can't find the fork me button right now, but If you actually go to the Microsoft repo that's actually driving this page, it's something like 300 lines of total code. There's nothing heavy duty or actual hard development to make a site like this. A site like this, or again, we'll look at Netflix, for example. Again, you see them showcasing their 2015 awards. You see their branding, they're black, they're red. And some of their major projects, organizations, and focuses. I hope that in 2016 we see more and more organizations creating sites like this as an entryway into the repository. You're no longer showing off, oh, come find me at github.com/my repo or my project. You're saying, find me at my project at github.io. And that's the way to get me, because not only you can see repositories and info, it lets you have an easy way to describe governance, how to commit back, other projects you may want to be associated with, other people you may want to follow. It can provide a bigger experience than just code.
Jamie, with the Lfs function of GitHub, is there any thought that you would go into maybe storing like Docker images or anything like that, more binary?
Yeah, so for those who do not know, at GitHub Universe, we announced the 1.0 release of Git Lfs. Git Lfs stands for Git Large File Storage. It was an open source project announced by GitHub back in the spring and has now recently reached 1.0. What that allows us to do, as you may have heard, or as you may know, Git itself doesn't handle large binary assets or objects well. Git itself is based on diffs. Its whole goal is to only store deltas and to be as small and compact as possible. Well, when you have a large binary asset, whether it be an image or a 300 meg video file, it's very hard to give a difference and store just what's changed. So Git Lfs is something that GitHub created as a solution that has been adopted across many of the other Git and legacy version control systems. It allows you to store under the covers. It stores a pointer to your Git Lfs asset within your Git repository. So it's versioned and managed just like anything else, but goes ahead and stores the actual object, the large file, elsewhere. So that way Git itself is not trying to do diffs, is not trying to manage it in the same way as it would a text-based asset. So your question, Rick, was now that Git Lfs is out there, would we expect to see it storing more artifacts, maybe Docker images, or for Java, people familiar with Java, jars and wars and years and that sort of thing? I think for the time being, we'll expect to see that living in the artifact repositories of old, the Nexuses, the Sonatypes, the Artifactory, and the other sort of Docker stores that seem to be springing up by the day right now. However, I know that Artifactory and Sonatype Nexus have both in the past 3 months announced support for Git Lfs within their own products. So instead of storing your Git Lfs items on GitHub or within your GitHub Enterprise instance, you can point at your existing Artifactory store where I imagine you already have large disks, fast I/O, backup and redundancy as you would for any other large item, and let that handle these large assets as well. So while I do not think GitHub in the short term becoming a replacement for those tools, we already see GitHub working hand in hand with those tools.
And Lfs is available to be configured in Enterprise?
Yeah, so GitHub Enterprise 2.4 ships with Git Lfs already installed. All you have to do is go ahead and turn it on and configure it. When you install Git locally, you also have to install Git Lfs locally. So that is an extra configuration for your local desktop. But we have a video describing the installation process on our website. It takes about 2 minutes, and that includes you being able to specify what file types you want to store in large file. So whether it's a MOV, a JPEG, or PSD, you set one config, and they're done.
Can I ask a question to see if I'm in the right place?
Absolutely.
I'm a developer. I used content control systems like BZR and CACVS before, and I came here expecting to learn how to use GitHub better because I still find it very difficult to do and cumbersome to do pull requests and stuff.
Sure.
Or is that going to happen here, or? Is this all selling GitHub to the enterprise?
Well, so GitHub for the enterprise is the same as GitHub on the .com, and quite frankly, the sort of questions you ask are what I see a lot. We have a lot of very proficient advanced users who have come in knowing Git, maybe even using Git from the command line, and know exactly what they're looking to do. Well, I have a lot of other users who come in and say, I've never used version control before, or I've only used Subversion or CVS. How do I make the gap? How do I make the change to GitHub? So I'd be happy to show a little bit more of that deeper dive here in a couple minutes.
Okay.
In fact, one of the things to facilitate that would be something that I started doing a while back, was beginning to use the browser rather than the shell to do pull request merges. And it was funny, the first time I did it, I almost did it by accident. And all of a sudden I had merged without realizing that I wasn't going to do anything else. It worked perfectly. I had no complaints at all. So you may find that depending on how you're doing it, there may be other ways to do it that are easier than you think, both in generating pull requests and in doing a merge if somebody's sending you one. By the way, I did not know that you could style that way with Markdown. I transitioned my blog to Pages months, well, actually more than a year ago, and it didn't occur to me that it could be that well done. So I kind of see how
that is pretty rich.
Does that. Yeah.
And actually, so for our government users who may be, or people who work within the government or work as government contractors, I'll show you another example real quick that I was actually showing Rick earlier on today, which is the GSA's website. So again, I tried to mention the link is open.gsa.gov/developer. But again, these are a lot of their major open data or open API projects. So you see things like Citizen Topics or Digital Gov Search API. This is their GitHub Pages site. And you can see at the bottom, you can edit this site, which brings you directly to the repository that runs this site on github.com. But they have, with their own styles and their own brands and their own relevant links, sort of all their major projects and descriptions as they may be. It's really good, and I see more and more of the government agencies and government system integrators going to this, and I think it's going to really help share and advocate for more code reuse throughout the community.
As the code goes towards defining infrastructure, like using cloud formations and some web services.
Yep.
Can you use something like this to develop maybe some type of secure AMIs or different type of virtual private clouds that can be reused and maybe help us go through the delivery process?
Absolutely. So, when you start talking about secure items, virtual private clouds, that's again one of the things we see customers using private repos or their own GitHub Enterprise instance for. But just like I showed with the Ansible playbooks earlier, you can use this as a way to create, whether it's through CloudFormations or Ansible or Puppet or Chef, a way to create the scripts and the tools that manage your entire infrastructure.
And hooking that back up to this security controls.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I'll say, you mentioned Heroku apps. One of the nice things that Heroku, as well as Cloud Foundry and other things have done, they've sort of made it easy, or
CloudFormation.
Yeah, they've
Not Cloud Foundry.
Well, both. They've realized that a lot of people are storing their items in Git. They're storing their Rails or their system configurations in Git. And so this is an example of Review Ninja. So the tool we saw earlier that I was showing for code review and approvals has a deploy to Heroku button directly on their README. That's actually how I created the Review Ninja instance you saw. It's a one-click. It asks me to log into Heroku, which I do, and it creates the app. It makes the direct ties to my existing GitHub repos, my organizations. They've handled all of the hard, heavy lifting and configuration behind the covers. And so we see the world going to this more and more with each passing month. Not saying that GitHub is the only one that's doing this. We see many other, quite frankly, tools. You look at AWS and the variety of tools and supported platforms they have. And you're seeing this tighter integration that's no longer, I store my configurations here, and I log into my systems here, and I store my code here, and my application server here. And then me as a person has to come and deconflict that and make it all run. we're seeing the ties, the webhooks, the APIs advancing to the point where they can all be aware of each other, and it becomes much more one-click configuration.
So is it there yet, or is it something that's going to evolve from what you currently have so far? So from your facial expressions, it's something that's going to be evolved.
It depends on how, I mean, quite frankly, it depends on how complex your configuration or process flow is currently. If all you need to do is spin up a basic Docker image or AWS server within your VPC that you have credentials for and stand up a JBoss server, that's very simple. But when you start talking about, well, I need to stand up an entire horizontal scaling farm that is using load balancers to manage its own load and add or remove different systems, now you're talking about adding more complexity and more tools into the game. That can still be done. Again, with Rick, I talked with Ansible and we did a demo a couple weeks ago where they were talking about some of that same sort of functionality, but the difficulty, the configuration required, the time to get that set up just grows more. Personally, while I make that facial expression, it's because I really want everything to be one click. Like I want to one click with a horizontally scaling web front end and a horizontally scaling database persistent store backend, and it be done.
You don't need programmers anymore.
So if you were going to interact with OpenShift, not directly from GitHub,
Yep.
you'd probably use Jenkins or some other intermediary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. We saw in the previous examples, we were using both Jenkins actually from CloudBees for this purpose, using it to both run my unit tests and integration tests, as well as using it to run my lint process for the Ansible scripts. And of course, Jenkins has hundreds of plugins, both deploy to OpenShift, deploy as Docker containers, deploy to Ansible, create Puppet recipes and that sort of thing. So we see for the integrations that are not, don't want to call them first-class citizens, but in reality, I want to call them just ones who haven't evolved yet. We see intermediary tools useful, such as Jenkins, to sort of bridge that gap in the short term.
My understanding this beginning of GitHub is
Sure.
that it's built on Merkle chains of hashes of the underlying content. And it reminds me a lot of IPFS, which is a technology that I'm very excited about. And where web pages no longer serve the content, they serve a hash of the content. And then you find the nearest copy of that hash.
Sure.
And basically makes it so companies, and commercially at the enterprise level, companies like Akamai, don't need to corrupt DNS to do their job. And but also in terms of recoverability, people like me don't really trust big companies to, you know, they all centralized services are a single point of failure, no matter how many steel vaults are protecting the assets. And so the idea of, does GitHub do anything like that, or is that something that's will in the future be merged into GitHub, where the actual content is completely distributed and the system is only
Storing a hash of the content? Is that
yeah, basically, yeah.
So take that at a couple levels. First of all, so Git is built on underlying on the Git technology, right? So that's where we talk about Git takes an object, does a hash of that object, and that's how it identifies it within its object tree. At that point, it allows, so when you're doing an update, if you want to say, hey, I haven't checked it, I haven't pulled down code for a day or 2 days or a week or a month, the first thing you do is you pull down a copy of the current object tree. That lightweight only has hashes in it, and you can immediately see, well, what hashes are now in the tree. You have a copy of the local objects from when you last pulled it down, and you identify, okay, there's 13 hashes that I do not currently have. At which point, you then go to your Git remote, at this case, it's github.com or Github Enterprise, and you pull down just those objects that have changed. Now, also keep in mind that the objects are not full copies of the file. There's only the diffs between what has changed. So all of the objects in the tree combine to be the current state of the file, as opposed to each object in such legacy systems where each object was a full copy of that file at that one time. So that's sort of how Git's operating under the covers. So now Git itself was created to be a distributed version control system. The notion, while that GitHub.com has a full copy of all the objects in the full tree, there's no reason that you can't have a full copy of all the objects in the whole tree. And at any one time, you and your team can decide GitHub.com is no longer the truth. You are the truth, or I am the truth, or our local Git server is the truth.
So it's already the way it works now, highly distributed.
Yes.
And that repositories that you're working with are locally copied.
Absolutely. And so the other advantage of that is because you have all the local data, when you talk about doing merges, diffs, commits, you're actually operating on your local data set. And only when you decide to push it out to the master server, if your organization has an idea of a master server.
That's kind of gets to, because BZR also does that.
Yep.
But the what I was getting at is that when it comes time to actually pick up, let's say
Right.
the video with the large file support,
Yep.
that GitHub would only have a hash.
Right.
And you would, instead of pulling the hash, the video, actual video from some central place, you would just look for the closest cache.
Right.
With that hash.
So with Git, so the notion of sort of an automatic discovery of where your closest route is to get that object.
Table, that's the core of IPFS.
Right. So that's not currently in the core or how we see most people using Git. But there's also the notion there's no reason what I do see users doing, quite frankly, is they can have multiple clones of their repositories, of all the objects, especially geospatially distributed teams, where they may have an East Coast clone and a West Coast clone. And within your configuration, you don't have to say, well, GitHub.com is my truth. You can say, well, I have a GitHub.com as a truth, and I have a West Coast truth, and I have an East Coast truth. And you can decide, when I'm pulling down a large object, I want to pull it down from East Coast.
Yeah, I just learned that last week.
So that's sort of where we're not seeing the automatic resolution of what the best path is, but we're seeing teams create multiple versions to support large bandwidth downloads, heavy pulls.
Yeah, I discovered that working with CJDNS. It was every time I tried to do something, I was pulling down 30 megs.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I was doing it wrong. Now it's instant to switch between branches.
I can't figure it out.
Are we off?
Oh, no, we're still live.
We're going to say it's just about 7 o'clock. I know people probably have things to do. They've finished eating pizza around here. If there are no more questions on the line, we can go ahead and wrap up.
Sure.
I can provide links and sort of a copy of my slides out as well to people, to the group afterwards. And we can continue here and answer more questions here in the room.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Jamie.
Well, I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Okay, I'm ending the broadcast now.